Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's Humanitini. My name is Jay Stewart. I'm the Director of Programs at HumanitiesDC, formerly known as the Humanities Council of DC. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'd also like to thank our host, Busboys and Poets. I'd especially like to thank Patrick Bonesteel for his patience and help in putting this together. I'd like to recognize Stephen Kolb, our videographer, in the back. I'd also like to recognize, you can hold your applause to the end. I'd like to recognize our board members, of whom we have several in the audience. Starting on my left, Tyler Petrushka, our board fellow. Can you all stand and just sort of wave? Tyler Petrushka. Eric Fingerhut. Monica Scott, our treasurer. Marjan Shalal, our host. Marie Long. And Ray Grad. Thank you all for being here. And last but not least, I'd like to recognize the HumanitiesDC staff, beginning with our executive director, Joy Ford Austin. Joy, if you could raise your hand. Seated next to her is Jasper Collier. Next to her first is Agatha Tomasic. Agatha is our director of fundraising and marketing. Next to her is, can everyone hear? Okay, can you guys hear me better this way? Oh, turn the music off. All right, it's going off. Okay, starting over with the executive director, Joy Ford Austin, who's standing up. Next to her is Agatha Tomasic, our director of fundraising and marketing. Seated at the table is Jasper Collier, the director of our digital museum. And Stephanie Scott, our executive assistant. And standing here at the door is the most important person in our organization, Lewis Hicks, who distributes the grants. So I'm going to ask him to speak in just a minute. But before I do, I want to just talk to you. Oh, and I'm sorry. Calvin Kuhnstack is there in the back, waving. He's our publicity person. Okay, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization. And about the event tonight. HumanitiesDC is an independent nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the federal agency in charge of supporting the humanities throughout the United States. HumanitiesDC is an essential part of the district's effort to provide quality humanities-related programs that preserve Washington's cultural legacy and promote civic engagement in every neighborhood in DC. In 2017, HumanitiesDC is exploring the topic, What is your DC? Last year, we reviewed the 225-year history of the District of Columbia. This year, we are anchored firmly in the present-day concerns of DC residents. Our topics, which may be found on our website, range from graffiti art found along the DC Metro to DC government programs geared toward helping the homeless. Our hope is to help the people of DC to determine how their surroundings shape their concept of a shared municipal culture, and to recognize how their own individual daily decisions reshape that context in new and unique ways. Today's topic is DC culture and the Michelin Guide. Here today to discuss this topic is a panel of journalists and other experts in the field. Starting on this side, thank you. Starting on this side, I'd like to recognize our moderator, Dr. Cherie Ward from the University of the District of Columbia. Who brought a contingent of students with her tonight, in case you hadn't noticed. Next to her is Tim Carman, a journalist with the Washington Post. Next to him is Kathy Hollinger from the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington. Next to her is Maura Judkis, also with the Washington Post. And finally, Kwame Onwuachi, a master chef in the area. With that, I would like to turn things over to Dr. Ward. Oh, I'm sorry.
Happy New Year.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you. One last thing. Lewis, could I ask you to come and speak very briefly about our grants program?
And that's the operative word, brief. We have a grant program that we have open humanities grants. I encourage you to look on our website. We are offering open humanities grants about a subject about Washington, D.C. We're presenting awards of $5,000 to $15,000, different from our past years. We also have a Soul of the City grant program in which you teach leadership skills to students in a group of about 20 students. So please check our website for our upcoming grants. The deadline for submissions is March 3rd at 11:59 p.m., not 12:01. So please check our website. We would love to encourage you for a story about Washington, D.C. Jay.
Dr. Ward.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Oh, now you got to be better than that. How are you tonight? That's much better. Thank you. Welcome to tonight's Humanitini. Of course, I'm so appreciative that my students have come out to support and share in this Humanitini experience, because it is truly about having all age groups, all interests, all cultures to communicate in this dialogue in exchange of Humanitini. So without further ado, my job is to keep the program on time. We've never gone over time. So you may see me giving our panelists hand cues. Each of them will give a 5-minute presentation. And after that, we open it up to you, our audience. So as they are speaking, please think of questions that you might like to ask them. And so without further ado, we're going to start with our first presenter tonight, Mr. Tim Carman. Give it up.
Well, thank you, and thanks for coming out. So the topic, as I understand it, we're talking about DC restaurant culture, I think tied into the Michelin Guide, and I think I have a perspective on it because I focus mostly on the cheap restaurants around the DC area, and there is a specific category within the Michelin Guide that is called the Bib Gourmand, which is basically the cheap eats section. They don't get stars, but they get the honor of being awarded a Bib Gourmand, and this is significant for the restaurants that get it. And I think we all knew when Michelin Guide announced that they pretty much held back the expectations. They said they were just going to focus on DC proper. So I think we all sort of knew that they weren't going to go out into the suburbs. They wouldn't go even to the exurbs. They wouldn't go where a lot of really interesting cheap eats are. And so I sort of knew what to expect, but when they did announce their Bib Gourmands, I forget exactly how many they had, 12, 13, there weren't even many of them. Some of them, to me, weren't cheap eats at all. They were like, when you have to spend $30, $40, $50 on a meal, that's not a cheap eat. Not to me. And so I was disappointed with that. And I was disappointed because it felt like it was dashed off. Like they were using the sort of Bib Gourmand category sometimes as what felt like a dumping ground to restaurants that didn't quite earn a star, but they wanted to acknowledge them, so they would give them a Bib Gourmand. And I don't know, maybe I felt like a personal thing because I've spent a lot of time and invested a lot of miles on my car exploring the really wealth of international foods that we have around the area. And I've been doing it, I used to work at the city paper for a long time, and I started then. And I think I told Calvin this story, but it's really illustrative to me of how much our dining scene has changed. Like there is a place on 14th Street called Great Wall Szechuan House. I don't know how many people have been there. It's a really lovely Szechuan Chinese restaurant. The chef is a master Szechuan chef, which if you know about the process to become a master chef of any province in China, it's a really onerous process. It takes years. And he's a master chef, but he was in charge of basically a Chinese-American takeout. They were just doing, stir fries and the classic, beef and broccoli type dishes. And one day at City Paper, I was trying to find a place that did genuine Szechuan, and I was having a real hard time finding anyone who did the cuisine. And so I just started cold calling these restaurants with Szechuan in their name. And so I came upon Great Wall, and the owner, May, she said, well, my husband's a master chef, and you come down and he'll cook for you. And I went down there, and it was a little hole in the wall. It had bulletproof glass that I had to kind of speak through the little hole to talk to the chef and May. But then he started cooking food for me, and it was like food like I've never had before. It was my first real experience with Sichuan cooking, and this was in 2006. And he did not only the classic Szechuan chili oil, which is spicy and numbing, but he did like Chinese banquet food, and it was beautiful. It was like very creative and very ornate and big presentation. And the question after they fed me all these different dishes was, well, why don't you serve this to Washingtonians? And they're like, well, no one will eat it. And I was like, yes, they will. And sure enough, I wrote a column about Great Wall, and that very day, people were just showing up and asking for the chef's special Sichuan menu. And within a few months, they had actually put it on their menu. Is that better? Yes. Sorry. They put it on their menu, and now if you go to Great Wall Sichuan House, there's no more bulletproof glass. It's a restaurant. It's got wood floors. It's got it's painted. It looks like a real place, and it really makes me proud to walk in there. And every time I walk in there and see May, she acts like I've saved their life, and walks up to me and hugs me. And it's a very small moment, but it makes me realize the role of food journalism in finding these places. It takes time, and it does take a little effort, but to me, that's what I think a lot of us do in this business is look for these places and try to find new chefs and new restaurateurs, and that's what I'm looking for in Michelin Guide. If they're going to be here in Washington D.C. and provide a service that is going to, not that our job is to help restaurants, but to provide a service to tell people where to go and where to eat, I think they need to invest the time, the staff, and the money involved in it, because it does take time and staff and money to do all of this stuff. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Tim Carman. Oh, come on, he was better than that. Yes. And now for our next speaker, we're going to turn the mic over to Miss Kathy Hollinger. Give her a great round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. And I will echo the thanks. Thanks for coming out tonight. So I think I'm going to be speaking from a little different perspective, because my job is very different than what these two wonderful people at the Post do. But I run an association, the Trade Association for Food Service across the region. And my job is to represent the owners and the operators and ensure that they are able to operate in markets that are also good to them. So representing them in advocacy efforts with various small business initiatives, and also create programming that drives people and traffic to their restaurants so that they can sustain these models and stay in business. But we also are asked many times to speak to what is happening in the industry in terms of growth, what we've seen over the last 5 years, 10 years, the last year, and what we've been seeing, and what hopefully all of you have been seeing, is that across the region, and I will just speak to DC this evening, but in DC, neighborhoods have really blossomed, and restaurants have really been the anchors of those neighborhoods, which has been fantastic, because from an industry standpoint, these restaurants are employing people, they're training people, they're offering a great service in terms of wonderful eats, ranging from quick serve to formal fine dining, and the city has really blossomed in that way. We have received so many accolades from others outside of the city, which is always fantastic in terms of getting on the map and making sure people know, yes, we always knew that DC was great, but other people now know that DC is great. But the Michelin Guide, just speaking to the Michelin Guide, you know, we had a lot of mixed feelings, because the reality is that we are 96 in our association, 96% of those restaurants are independent operators, meaning they're homegrown or they're independently operated. They're not a part of a larger business or corporate structure where they've just extended their brand here in Washington. So they're small businesses, and they take a lot of pride. As Tim was saying, there's a lot of work that goes into what they do every day, and a lot of work into what people who represent this industry do every day to know their market. There was a little bit of, does Michelin know the market? I mean, did they come and spend time to really understand our market, which is very complex but beautiful and rich in terms of culture and neighborhoods and communities? But at the same time, from an international standpoint, it did put us on the map in a Michelin kind of way, where those who did get awarded or mentioned or stars, we want to be able to celebrate them. And I think none of us we all want to celebrate them and acknowledge them, but it's the work that goes into really knowing your market and understanding what goes into maybe acknowledging them in that way. So as an association leader, we were walking a very fine line, because we always want to leverage the accolades that we're getting from others outside of the market and outside of the city, outside of the country. But we also want to make sure that as a very unique Washington, DC, definitely as it relates to food service and restaurants, we're very unique. We're independently operated. There's a lot of creative juices that were developed right here in Washington, and we always want to make sure that that's celebrated and acknowledged. So I say all of that to say that we feel that we always want to congratulate those who have been honored and mentioned, but we always want to encourage that there's a lot of resources and good work and good thought put into the scoring of anything that relates to our industry. I think I ended early, did I?
Oh, you got about 30 seconds left. You know what you can do with the 30
Yeah.
seconds? How many people in here actually know what the Michelin Guide is? Okay, but not everybody, so would you?
I'm going to let Maura do that, because they have more of the background on Michelin Guide, the history of the Michelin Guide, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
I'll just say that I'm a native Philadelphian.
Hey, I'm from Philly too.
All right.
That's what's up.
I've been in DC for 30 years. I've seen this city change in the most amazing ways, in every possible way. And I know that I'm not allowed to call myself a Washingtonian, but I've been in DC longer than I've been in Philly, so I'm going to half claim Washington. Is that fair?
Sorry.
Okay, let's give it up again for Miss Kathy Hollinger. You know, they call us Philly's finest, you know? So you can claim Washington because you've been here for a while, but your soul is in Philly.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. And our next speaker for tonight is Miss Maura Judkis. Maura, give her a round of applause, please. Now, come on. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I read about food and culture and the arts for, a little closer, sorry. I read about food and culture and the arts for the Washington Post. And I was the first person actually to write that the Michelin Guide would be coming to DC. We got kind of tipped off a couple weeks ahead of time. Someone from Michelin emailed me and said that they would be hosting an event in DC. And so, of course, your mind only goes one place. You wonder if they would be bringing a guide to Washington. And so I had kind of an email back and forth with them. They agreed to give us an exclusive on that news. And I ended up talking to Michael Ellis, who is the director of the Michelin Guide. And so that kind of gave us, it set our expectations as reporters. And that interview with him gave us a lot of information about what was to come. I mean, one thing that they told us was that they're inspectors who are anonymous. They're not like Tim and me. They would never appear on a panel like this. They're like ghosts. They go into restaurants without anyone knowing. They had already been visiting a lot of restaurants in the city at this point. They had already gone to a lot of different places when they decided to announce the guide. And they tend to be pretty conservative, is what he told me. Conservative in that they don't like to over-award people. They want to wait until you've really earned it, is one thing that he said. Particularly because they don't like to see restaurants kind of yo-yo back and forth. They don't want to give someone 3 stars and then drop them down to 2 or drop them off the list entirely. And so that kind of gave us a hint that we might not be seeing any 3-star restaurants, which, as you may know, is the highest honor in Michelin. The next thing he told me is something Tim already said, was that they would not be going to the suburbs of Washington. And so we knew that the guide would maybe be a little bit thinner than other cities. I actually brought it with me. We didn't realize it would be this thin. It's like a pamphlet, it's pretty small. Just for reference, the guide for New York is about 8 times as thick as this. It's a lot bigger. And of course, New York is a bigger city. But, it made us wonder, if they had rushed it, actually, because it was so thin and it excluded so many restaurants in the suburbs. And then another thing that they mentioned, too, is that I asked them, why DC? Why now? Because Michelin, while it has a big presence in Europe and Asia, it had actually been diminishing its presence in America, because it used to have guides in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and it actually killed both of those guides in recent years. So it made me wonder, why are they picking us as opposed to cities where they already have a very big presence or had a big presence? And the director told me that it was partly because DC has such a big restaurant stature. It's grown so much in the last 10 years. But then he also mentioned that he used a funny quote, that it was of interest to the Michelin group. And I think maybe some of the people who know Michelin might know this, but Michelin, it's the same as the tire company. It's Michelin tires. And the reason that we have a Michelin guide is that in 1900, as people were starting to buy tires and have cars, they wanted to get people to go out in the countryside and kind of wear down their Michelin tires. So they created these travel guides for hotels and restaurants, and that's why we have a Michelin guide today. And so, and the fact that DC was of interest to the Michelin group made us wonder, is it partly to impress people that they have lobbying interests too? We had a lot of questions, and so as I was reporting this story, I spoke with people at Michelin, but then I wanted to talk to chefs in DC. And it was kind of maybe an open secret at this point. I think that rumors had gotten out that Michelin would be coming to DC, but no one had really confirmed it. And so I started talking to a number of chefs. I talked to chefs and restaurateurs, Ashok Bajaj of Rasika and a number of different restaurants. And, and the news was met so warmly by him. He was so proud, and he felt like it would really put DC on an international stage. And then another person I talked to was Mark Furstenberg of Bread First, because he has kind of an interesting perspective. He wrote a story about a couple of years ago about how he felt DC wasn't quite up to par as a restaurant city, and so he had kind of a more tempered perspective. And then I called Aaron Silverman from Rose's Luxury and Pineapple and Pearls, which, as we know, did very well in the restaurant or in the Michelin Guide, and his reaction was, it kind of blew his mind. Actually, he was like, "Shut up, no way!" And then I think he said maybe some unprintable in a family newspaper expletives, because he was so excited. And I think, as we criticize the Michelin Guide, I think one thing to remember is, it might have a different purpose for us as consumers, but to chefs, it is a really, really big deal, and it's an incredible honor. And I think that we should remember that it's really important and an honor for the city to have it too.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give her a round of applause. I hope you are thinking about your questions that you're going to ask, because after our next speaker, we will open it up to you. That's where the whole humanity discussion really starts to form. So coming up next is Mr. Kwame Onwuachi.
Thank you.
Come on, give it up. Thank you.
So my introduction is not as nearly as long as theirs. I cook for a living, so I'm on the opposite side. The Michelin Guide is a huge honor for any chef or restaurateur, point blank in a discussion. So for it to come into the city, it automatically puts it on a world stage, which is huge. As far as the guide and agreeing to the guide, there's not one rating list, whether it's in restaurants or music or anything, that anyone wholeheartely agrees with, So as a chef, whether it's the Michelin Guide or any other list, there's no okay, every restaurant on that list is amazing, because it's subjective. The Michelin Guide has a palate, and a palate is developed over a period of time. So whether they may particularly like a restaurant over another one, they're still people at the end of the day. They're not robots or machines, and there's not an algorithm to a great restaurant. It's a personal preference. So the list itself, I think they did a great job. Could they have done better? Probably. Do they think that they did the best? Maybe. I have no idea. But I know that it's an honor for it to be in this city, and for the chefs that are in the city that received a star or a nod as Bib Gourmand. That's why we do this. So I'm happy it's here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Onwuachi. And that concludes our panelists' presentations for tonight. So do we have any questions from the audience? And so at this time, can we turn the house lights up a little bit so that we can see where the hands are? Put your hands up high, please. The lights are in my eyes. And so Mr. Jay Stewart is going to come around with the microphone, and we will take questions from the audience. Keep your hands up so he can see. You having a good time tonight? I can't tell. Are you having a good time tonight? Now there, yeah. Now that's what I'm talking about. Are you in the back yet, Mr. Stewart? Please state your name and then ask your question.
My name is Melva Harrison, and I'm a Washingtonian from Southeast DC, retired from DC Fire Department. Michelin, like we was just discussing, was a tire. And with me working the streets at night from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning, we grabbed food, and they had hogs on the hill, this. Washington, D.C.,
We can't hear you up here. Could you speak a little bit louder? Hold the mic up to your mouth.
Okay. I'm Washington, D.C. person, retired from D.C. Fire Department, and Michigan tires were tires to us. Okay? So I worked from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning, and we loved restaurants. And basically on Pennsylvania Avenue, I did not migrate here. I was here. So what I'm trying to say is, really not trying to say anything, is the fact that now y'all got restaurants and all that good stuff going on now. This was when I'll be 66 this year. We had restaurants to go to, restaurants that we had to go to. We went to our restaurants. Now y'all coming in. We used to have the hot dog stands, hot dog nuts, everything catered and all that good stuff. But the bottom line is, what y'all, when you come here and you talk about us going to your restaurants, and I love a restaurant, and I went to a Continental restaurant. They tore it down, president went there, all that. I love good restaurants, but coming to the restaurants that you are talking about, you got to do more digging. And when you were saying that coming into DC, DC was a black town. It was a black town. We did cuisines and all that. What you was talking about, I don't know what Michigan, the tire. That's what we look at as a tire. So I'm home now. I'm home, and I would like to come. I have been here before, since I've been here, but now, what is so good about what you saying that your restaurant is offering? Y'all said I'm going to talk about your restaurant.
Okay, thank you, Melvin. We're going to have, this young lady is going to just...
I think one thing that that she mentioned is that you know.
Talk to you anyway.
I'm sorry.
You said something.
She's going to address your comment, and would you please hand the mic back to Mr. Stewart? Thank you again so much for your comment.
Sure. So I think one thing to remember about Michelin is that it's just one of a number of ways of rating restaurants, and it's up to the consumer, what they think is going to be the most relevant. And there's debate within the restaurant community about how relevant it is too. There are a number of different rating systems, and so it's something that it's very popular among travelers, especially European travelers, but here maybe not as much. So it's not something that people are going to, I think, necessarily live and die by here. People might find Yelp more important. They might find recommendations from their friends. There are a number of different ways that you can get information about restaurants, and this is really just one particular point of view.
And one of our other panelists would like to address that.
I would just add that when we're talking about, so as we're talking about the restaurant scene here in Washington, to your point, it was very different, and it is very different, and it's different in many, many ways. And we can make the arguments outside of the restaurant community how DC has changed in a good way and in a bad way. I think as it relates to restaurants and types of restaurants, there's so many, which is really the point. When you look at neighborhoods across the city and you look at the last 20 years, as an industry, just with food service and with restaurants, it has grown so much, and there's so many options, from smaller places similar to what Tim was speaking to larger establishments that you can sit and dine and have full service, even though you could have full service there as well. But the idea is that there's so much diversity now in terms of types, cuisine, in neighborhoods, so I hope that just adds to the comments that were offered to you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy and Maura. Do we have another question from the audience? Please stand up, speak directly into the mic, say your name, and please state your question.
Hi, my name is Pepper. My question is, how often is the Michelin Guide updated or come out?
You want to address that, Tim, or?
Do you know better?
They say that
the mic.
it's yearly, once a year, and they have told us that in subsequent years they plan to expand to the suburbs too. So in next year's guide, I mean, this one came out in October, so I think around the same time next year, I'm hoping that we might see a slightly more robust guide that includes Virginia and Maryland and a lot of the great restaurants there as well.
Okay, and Tim's going to comment on that.
So one thing that I think that's important to note, I mean, Maura's done a lot of the reporting on the Michelin Guide. I did an essay on it after they did the Bib Gourmand Awards, and I tried to get some answers on just how many, inspectors they had, and if any of them actually lived in DC, and they only had a handful of inspectors, which is fine, but I don't know if you remember the final number. Was it?
You need the mic.
It was like a little over a dozen, I think.
Yeah, I think I was going to say 10, but I didn't know if that was the exact number.
Yeah.
But it was around that number, 10 to 12. Mm-hmm. But none of them lived here. And even the person who was editing, I learned, did not live here. And she was working on other books at the same time. So to me, it felt like this was a project that they were squeezing into other projects. And, you know, we all do that. So it's not, you know, I don't want to be harsh on it. It's like we all have to juggle multiple projects, right? But, you know, I think when you think of Michelin star, you know, a Michelin guide, you think that they are going to invest a lot of time and a lot of energy, and they're going to have anonymous inspectors, and they're going to be embedded. And when I found out that it wasn't, I was like, well, you know, of course, this is the first guide. So maybe this is a reflection of their first year here. I think it's going to take a number of years for them to really get up to speed with the DC community, particularly the suburbs. I mean, we're a very sprawling area, and we have a lot of different personalities. We have a lot of different budget ranges, and they're not going to get it right the first time. They're not going to probably get it right for the first 5 times. It's going to take some time, but I think they'll get there.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I'd like to, before we take another question from the audience, basically there were 2 articles written about the Michelin Guide. Tim and Maura addressed it in a Washington Post article, but actually Bon Appetit named Washington, D.C. the 2016 Restaurant of the Year. So I'd like all of our panelists to address, why do you think the margin of difference in the 2 articles, where Bon Appetit kind of lauded DC and its restaurants, and the Michelin Guide, as Kwame said, it's an honor just that they were here and they were mentioned, but some of the things they had to say about the neighborhoods and the restaurants were not quite as flattering. So I'd like everybody to chime in. Start with Kwame, please.
Yeah, the 2 articles are very different. I think from a journalistic standpoint, they put a lot of work into researching these restaurants and what restaurants are good. So for them to come out with a list saying these are the restaurants that they think are worthy, probably didn't strike them the right way. As opposed to the Bon Appetit, they were just saying this is a great restaurant city, look out for it. So.
Okay, Maura.
I agree with what Kwame just said. I think that the goals of these different inspections were they're pretty different. You know, Michelin, they go piece by piece. They go to so many restaurants. They also bring in people from overseas too. The Michelin inspectors are trained in France, and some of them are like particular to certain territories, but some of them just travel around the world and go to restaurants, and that's something that they do to kind of ensure that that it's very objective. That everyone is getting a fair review, and also that like no one is grading on a curve. The Michelin Guide always says that 2 stars in DC is going to be the same as 2 stars in Shanghai or Paris or London or Brussels or anywhere else that the guide has. Whereas Bon Appetit, they're based in America. They have maybe it's hard to say like what each inspector's specialty is because they're so anonymous. But I mean, one of the things that Tim and I noticed in the guide is that there are some fundamentally American things that were maybe misinterpreted, like their choice of barbecue restaurants, for example, was a little bit unusual to us. Whereas Bon Appetit is going to have a really good handle on that kind of thing. So they're very different publications for incredibly different audiences.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to hand it over to Kathy.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, for sure, I believe Bon Appetit came out before the guide was released, right? Yes. For us, as an association and as a community of restaurants, Bon Appetit was a celebration for everyone. I mean, it really spoke to Washington, D.C., and being a restaurant city. I mean, that was everyone can celebrate that. It was a uniform accolade and praise that everyone could get behind, very unifying, a lot to celebrate. We loved that, because it was celebrating what we see every day with the restaurant industry and how it's grown and how it's getting that recognition. What I also loved about Bon Appetit, and not saying that I don't love Michelin, they're just so very different in terms of it's very different. But if I remember, so Adam Rappaport is a native Washingtonian, is he? I believe, yes, Anthony, he is. He's a native Washingtonian. I thought, at least in the area, but I think in Washington, D.C. And that also resonated with our industry because they thought it was one of their own coming back decades later from New York and seeing all this amazing growth in Washington, D.C. So I will just say that that was something that we got behind in a very big way because we felt that it was just such a unifying, celebratory moment.
And Tim?
So I think it's complicated to try to parse why Michelin feels so thin and Bon Appetit feels so celebratory. I think part of it is what Maura just talked about. That they're trained in France, so there's a French sensibility to the inspectors, and that's important to remember. It's like they're looking at it from a classically French perspective. I mean, They do try to understand all different cuisines, but they're first and foremost trained in French cuisine and the sort of like fine dining you will find in France, and which is a very particular style of fine dining. I mean, it's very formal, it's very expensive, it has French service, and some of the restaurants that are inherently Washingtonian, they're not that. There's a different sensibility to a lot of Washington. And not only that, but I think some of the restaurants that people were surprised that didn't make the list, like Rasika, it takes a long time to understand a cuisine. Particularly a type of cuisine that the chef at Rasika is trying to do, which is sort of modern Indian. And I'm not saying that they did or they didn't get it, but it's like, I think the hardest part of like trying to judge anyone's food or their restaurant or what they're trying to do is that you really have to spend time and talk and research and know things first. And if your first sensibility is French, it may not always be the easiest thing to go to these other restaurants and understand exactly what they're trying to do. And I think some of that's the disconnect. I think Bon Appetit, looks at it from a broader perspective. It looks at the restaurants, they can see the Americanness of it and appreciate it. If there's not the formal service, if the silverware is not 2 inches from the edge of the table, they're not going to, mark you off for that. There's a reason that the Michelin Guide did not succeed in Los Angeles, because Los Angeles is much like DC, that it's very spread out, and there are great restaurants all around, and not many of them conform to this like fine dining concept that is Michelin focused. And Jonathan Gold, the great critic, Pulitzer Prize winning critic at the LA Times, he pretty much just said flat out that it wasn't the right fit. Michelin was not right fit for Los Angeles, and I think they saw it. And we'll see if it's the right fit for DC after a few years.
Okay, thank all of our panelists for responding to that. The other thing that comes out of what you all said is basically Michelin has a structured guide to their assessment of restaurants, and Bon Appetit clearly says in its article they had no criteria. They were going on taste and taste alone. So let's throw it back to our audience. We have a question right here in the front.
I was actually just wondering how many of the restaurants on the Michelin Guide were in like the inner city, like Southeast, like Anacostia, Benning Road. How many of those restaurants actually, if there are any on the Michelin Guide, how many made it? If so, and what are those restaurants? And why don't, if we have any, if we don't have any of those restaurants, why didn't they make the list?
Okay, our panelist Tim is going to address that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the short answer is there's none. And I mean, it's not Anacostia's fault. Anacostia doesn't have many restaurants to begin with. And I think this has been a... Well, let me clarify. I mean, I've spent a good bit of time, just walking around Anacostia. There are restaurants, but the kind of restaurants that Michelin would look for, there's not many of the formal sit-down, full service restaurants that I found, and maybe I've missed some, but I do look for them, and I have been looking around for them, and if there are other ones that I've missed, I would love to hear about it.
Okay, thank you, Tim. We have another question right here. And then the young lady over here in the corner, and we have like 4. Sir?
Hi, my name is Tom Hoey. 2 very quick questions. One is we've talked about this explosion. I've been in DC almost 50 years. So we've talked about this explosion in restaurants. I now hear chefs, I've talked to them, and restaurant owners saying they think DC has hit the bubble. There's been such an explosion of restaurants in DC, they expect you to start seeing failures. The other thing is I came to DC in 1969. When I came here, there's like 5 classical French restaurants in DC that were very well known, Claude Boucher and others. There are none left. What happened to them?
Okay, we're going to throw this to Kathy first.
I didn't hear the second part, but I'll address the bubble. I think that, yes, we've seen incredible growth. And I would say that whenever I'm flanked by reporters, I'm never going to stick to my facts because they can fact check. But in the last few years, we've seen more growth than probably many other cities in terms of the number of restaurants in a concentrated area that have opened. And I do think that a lot of things feed into that. I think that, I'm a little bit more policy rooted, but you look at 10, 15 years ago, whatever leadership was in place locally 10, 15 years ago, they try to create a fertile ground so that businesses can open and survive. I think it's very, very hard today to be in business in Washington, D.C. and to thrive. I'm not saying you can't survive, but if you're a business owner or a restaurant owner, you're hoping that you have some profit margin to be able to really feel good about what you're doing every day. And I think it's much harder today. So is there a bubble? I think it's all relative because the growth has been so massive that it's somewhat of a question, is there a bubble as in context to other cities and states that have had that kind of growth. But I think it's becoming increasingly difficult for small business owners to be able to keep up with a lot of the demand on the regulatory legislative front.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question?
Yes. So my name is Sydney Taylor, and So my question is, and I'm just going to lay some context for my question. So I hear you guys speaking on the lack thereof, or the connection or lack thereof between European cuisine or French cuisine and that of those in the Americas, as well as how the people who are on your Michelin list and those who go about defining what cuisine sets the bar and what does it. How can we attest to the validity of your statements if we're looking at people who have no relativity in the realm of our cuisine and our culture? Also, we're looking at, like this young man here brought up, the fact that there are no restaurants or eateries that made the list in the Southeast region or the more rural and urban areas of DC. It's more than common knowledge and historic knowledge that oftentimes when we allow European collectives and or, I want to say, Yep. Okay, let's just go like that. When we allow foreign investors and collectives to come in and tell us how to do what we already do, where do we draw the line? Also, when we're looking at the fact that none of these eateries, and the fact that you just so frankly said that there are no eateries, and then when you heard the audience attest to that, you quickly retracted your statement, I want to point out that anytime we allow those who are not of the original culture or those who are impeding on that initial or that original bubble that is the people's culture, they're always going to come in with foreign standards. You guys are up here referencing French cuisine like those are the people who taught the world how to cook, when we all know that Africans started all of that. Now,
Excuse me, 1 second. First of all, he was just saying that for the Michelin Guide,
Right, I was
that
saying
the
that.
perspective that they come from. So he wasn't making that blank statement.
right. However, I do understand the contrast that you guys are drawing between Bon Appetit or whatever the other party here is and Michelin, and you're saying, you know, the people who are allowing for these standards to be set are, they're of the highest French and European cuisines, and they have very discerning taste buds and whatnot, as if those of us who were here beforehand can't even begin to fathom having such standards.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to pull out a couple points that you said and think about them in terms of questions so I can try to very humbly address it. I really think it's important that we separate the discussion around Michelin Guide and the discussion in terms of eateries and the city and what's happening in the city, and because the Michelin Guide is a very, very different animal, and I think that any chef that's asked, and I would encourage you to ask chefs. I mean, Kwame's one of the best, but it is truly the biggest honor for a chef. I'm not a chef. Tim could be a chef. We're not chefs. So from our standpoint, we're purely looking at it in terms of a guide that is really like an entity that came into our city to judge our city in terms of its greatness and in terms of not the lack thereof. It's just the way that the guide works. Like, how many actually got stars? 12? Out of 2,500 restaurants in the city? So for sure the answer to your question is no, right? Because it's 12 out of 2,500. So I just want to separate Michelin Guide because I'm not an expert there on how they do what they do. But I will say, as a city, Bon Appetit, I'm not even sure if they had or did not have a process. But the reality is that people are taking note that Washington is a really diverse foodie town. And you have people who love cooking and are doing their thing in this city and doing it really well, and people are noticing it. Do there need to be more incentives that the city provides for people to open businesses all across the city? For sure, but I feel that that's not their fault. Michelin Guide, when they come into a territory, that is a much different conversation around our city and what we want our city to be and look like and feel like in terms of opportunity for everyone. I hope that somewhat made sense.
Okay, Kwame, can you tune in? And then Tim would like to say something.
Yeah, so I understand your viewpoint on like why the Michelin Guide can come in here and tell us what restaurants are good, and we already know what's good, right?
Yes.
Right? That's basically what you're saying.
DC, do we know it's good?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the basis of like haute cuisine or culinary arts is based in French technique. And the Michelin Guide was started in France because they wanted to sell more tires and whatnot, and Maura said it. And the first 1 star means that if you're driving past it, you should stop and eat there. 2 stars means you should make a road trip out of your way and eat there. And 3 stars means no matter where it is, you need to eat here before you die. That's how the Michelin Guide started, right? Now, I grew up in New York, and I grew up in the Bronx and in Harlem, and there's great soul food restaurants there in Harlem. There's great like Dominican restaurants in the Bronx that I think are better than any 3 Michelin star restaurant that I've ever been to. But they're based on rudiments in French technique, and that's why the Michelin Guide rates those restaurants more so than none. Should they go into the outer boroughs or to the southeast and things like that? Absolutely, but that's just not what they focus on, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure back in Paris, there are places that are off the beaten path that are down-home country places that they don't really bat an eye out. And it's the same thing here. I don't think it's really discriminatory. That's just what they do. And you can either respect the list or not. Like, it's not telling you that those are the restaurants you have to eat at. It's just those are the ones that they're particularly focusing on. So.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other thing to keep in mind is it's a guide. It's not gospel. So do we have another question in the audience? You have someone?
Yeah, right here.
Okay. Speak directly into the mic, please. State your name.
Okay, cool. Hey guys, my name is Alethea. Hey. So I'm actually in this field. I'm a manager at a restaurant right off Benham Road, not that far from A Street. It's called Langston's Bar and Grill. We Southern Grill, awesome food. Guys need to come through. 1831 Benham Road. So my thing is, we don't have that many people coming through, because on A Street we got so many new bars and restaurants. But from there they don't go to Benham Road. You know, they see maybe urban people around, and they don't think. You know, if you don't know about us, you will miss us. So this advice, how can I get my restaurant more people and more clientele? Because we have awesome food, you guys. It's like DC hidden secret. So how do I do that? This advice.
Okay. Does anybody want to enjoy it? Well, I think that kind of goes along with the panel was saying all along. The Michelin Guide does not cover all of Washington, D.C. As Kathy said here, there are 2,500 restaurants in the district, so they're not going to cover them all. But it is great of you to mention your restaurant, so you advertised it just now.
I got to.
Okay, can we have another question, please?
Thank you.
This gentleman here in the middle, sir, please stand up.
Okay.
Yes, you, sir. We're trying to get all around the audience so we have a good representation of all the quadrants of the audience. Can you make your way up here, Jay, please? Are you having a good time so far? Oh, come on. Now, you know they're filming this. Is that the kind of applause you want to hear? Are we having a good time at this Humanity? That's much better. Thank you. Sir, please proceed with your question.
Thank you. This is a question for Kwame. It's kind of two questions. First, I mean, as a chef, do you think there's a distinctive DC flavor, taste? And do you think, did the Michelin Guide capture whatever that taste is that kind of defines DC, if that exists?
No, I don't think there's a distinct DC flavor at all. That's what makes DC great, is there's so many different cultures here, and so many different restaurants that cover everything, you know, from Senegalese cuisine to authentic Mexican cuisine. You have it here. Do I feel like, excuse me?
Do you think the Michelin Guide captured that?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. But we need to remember it's their first year, you know, so they'll take time to grow and cover more restaurants.
And I'd just like to add the article that Tim and Maura wrote, there were not only restaurants cut out, I'd like Tim and Maura to address, they even left out the whole Vietnamese population in their assessment of great restaurants. So Tim, start with that, please.
Well, I think you were wondering where the Senegalese restaurant was?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh, I was talking about where's the authentic Mexican?
Oh, well, there's many authentic Mexican places. There's two on 14th Street. One is Taqueria Habanero. And it's a very good place. The owners are from Puebla, and then there's another one just 2 doors down called Mescalero, and the owners are from Mexico City, and they are doing genuine sort of interior Mexican street food. It's very good. I'm sorry, what was the question I was supposed to answer?
Well, that was fine. I actually was talking about, because we've had so many people from the audience kind of a little disgruntled about the fact that the Michelin Guide did not cover a broader spectrum of the district. And I was just making the point
that in you and Maura's article, you even talked about them leaving out a particular immigrant culture of the Vietnamese restaurants.
Right. This is correct. And I think it's really important, and I think we've mentioned this a few times already, that the Michelin Guide has its own sensibilities. And it doesn't mean that there's not good restaurants everywhere. There are people that really work hard and put out good food in so many places, in so many areas of the Washington D.C. area, even in the way out of the suburbs, in the exurbs, everywhere. And they're doing good food, and you know, part of our job is to try to find it and to try to understand it, and that's not always the easiest thing. You know, there are cultural differences, and there are things that we don't understand. But you know, part of the job as a reporter is to try to understand, and try to understand not from just, you know, gosh, do I like it or not, but do I understand what they are trying to do with the food? And that's the hardest part, I think, is to judge not just if it's good, but if it's doing what it's supposed to do. Is it that you don't like it because it's so different from what you know that you just don't understand it, or is it just not executed well by its own standards? And that's a really difficult thing to do week in and week out with so many different cuisines. I mean, there is a great Senegalese restaurant up in Hyattsville. I told Kwame about it, and I think Kwame's been there how many times now? A number of times. The owner's from Senegal, and I love the food. And before I even met him, I knew nothing about Senegalese food. So this is the difficulty of doing this kind of work. It does take a lot of listening. It does take a lot of time, and you try to put yourself outside of your own limited understanding of where you're coming from.
Okay, please chime in, Maura.
As to the point of exclusion, you mentioned we put in our story that a lot of Vietnamese food was excluded. I mean, the only restaurant that made it into the guide was Doi Moi, 14th Street, and that is not even an exclusively Vietnamese restaurant. It's a number of different Asian cuisines in that restaurant. And that was like a real flaw of the fact that they didn't go into the suburbs. I mean, there's truly excellent Vietnamese food in our suburbs. And you know, part of us wondered, like, we almost, of course, the Michelin Guide is not our guide. We can say how many ways that we would have done it, and it wouldn't matter. But part of us kind of wishes that they would have just waited a little bit and had a more complete guide, and waited till they had the resources to go into the suburbs. Because again, it is kind of an incomplete picture of what there is to offer in DC, and that's something that we really look forward to seeing in future editions of the guide.
Okay, thank you, Maura. And the other thing, keep in mind, when Maura and Tin wrote their article, they wrote it about 10 things in the DC Michelin Guide that didn't make sense to them. Many of those things are points that you are bringing up. Let's take another question.
Oh, I still have the mic. My name is Jeannie Nelson. I would like to know where you might get this Michelin Guide. Does it cost? And is there an online version of it?
Sure, I can take that. You can buy it in local bookstores. I'm not sure exactly which bookstores carry it, but I know that a number of local bookstores have it. You can buy it on Amazon. I think it might be like $15. I don't actually know the price. Does it say? Oh, $13. Great. There you go. Yeah. And again, it is very thin. I think that you can get parts of it online, but it's not the full guide.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the audience, please. Stand up, please.
I'll try.
Speak directly into the mic.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I work in the food service industry. And when the guide came out, we had kind of two questions. The first one was, why is the Inn at Little Washington included, whereas other Maryland and Virginia restaurants not? And then the other question is, it kind of does fall on restaurant group lines. Like, there are large omission of restaurant groups that are not included, and then there is one particular restaurant group that got, I don't know how many on the Beef Gourmand. So those are my questions.
I can take the first part of that about the Inn at Little Washington. So when I first started reporting the story that Michelin would come to DC, before they had announced any of the awards, they had actually told me that they would not be including the Inn at Little Washington because, of course, that was the first thing I asked. I mean, this is a really historic and wonderful restaurant in DC, and a lot of people knew that it was kind of a shoe-in for some kind of award. And they said, I think the exact quote was like, "We look forward to including Patrick O'Connell, the chef, in future editions of the guide." And so they told us that he wasn't going to be included, and it was actually a big surprise to us that they decided to make this one exception for him. It's very well deserved. It's something he's worked towards his entire life, but it is, it was a little confusing to us as well. We were surprised by it.
Well, and the other thing, again, there is a criteria and there are their judgments. It's kind of like with award shows, you have a voting body with the Michelin Guide, and it is up to their criteria that they use. Tim talked about it being based on French cuisine. Maura talked about there being 12 inspectors. So all of that is subjective to a degree, but we certainly appreciate your questions and comments. Let's take another one.
Hi, I can't stand up. I'm
Okay,
Rosemary
no
Reed, and my question is for Kwame. Your restaurant kind of came and then went. I wondered why. And the other question is, are you going to be cooking someplace else soon? Because we hear you are the best.
Tell us.
There are a number of reasons why the restaurant didn't stand the test of time. It's tough to talk about because it's like a family member passed away. That's how it feels. Beginning, you feel like disbelief, like, no, this can't be true. And then you're angry, and then you're grieving, and then you remember the good times you had with it, right? So that's where I'm at right now. And there's many reasons why it closed. The base reason, it just didn't make enough money for us to keep going. I mean, that's why business is closed. So will I be continuing to cook in DC? I'm not sure. I'm still in that reminiscing of the good times I have with my restaurant. And when I get over that period, then I'll start making my next steps. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's give Kwame a round of applause, because that's what families do. We have another question.
Hi, my name is Ashley. A big part of my job is marketing, and I hear you guys saying, like, we have a standard, but you said that you guys went to LA and it didn't work out there. So I'm wondering, as you grow and go into more urban type cities, are you willing to, like, change your standards? Because I don't feel like you can go into a place and just have your standards and set in stone and not be willing to change with the times or the Joneses.
I understand your comment, and I'll throw it to you. I think you're mistaken that they represent the Michelin Guide. They don't. We're just talking about it. Maura and Tim are news reporters who actually commented and did an article about the Michelin Guide. But Tim, take it away.
My name's Kwame.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
My bad. The night is long.
I just cook for a living. That's all that I do. If I could choose who gets Michelin stars, believe me, it would be a lot different. But we do have to remember that this was created in France. So, like, telling a company what they should do is, I don't feel like anyone has that place. There are many different guides and things that rate things, and that's just their prerogative. They're a business at the end of the day, and that's just what they do. So.
And right now, freedom of speech is still something we can practice.
You don't have to look at the guide. You can just go to your neighborhood restaurant. That's what I do. So.
Okay, another question, please.
I just have a quick question, specifically for the chef in the room. Oh, my name is Ajan, I'm sorry. It seems like the underlying theme and the tension in the room and the elephant is gentrification, and nobody really wants to say that. That's always a hot topic in DC. So my question is, because gentrification has happened, or I should say the demographics of DC are changing, what bridge can food do to kind of close that? Specifically speaking to the chef, of course, and then the news reporters, what can be done so that the restaurant industry in DC feels a lot more inclusive to those who may feel left out?
Sorry, say that again.
They didn't hear the end. Say the last part, please.
I just asked what the restaurant industry, specifically in DC, could do to bridge the gap so that there aren't, natives or other individuals who may feel left out.
One of the things that I'll address the first part of your question that restaurants can do to bridge the gap is by hiring people within communities. That's it. I mean, I would have apprentices from all over DC at my restaurant. Unfortunately it closed, but that's what I did to bridge the gap. Certain types of restaurants will not thrive in certain communities. So that's why restaurants don't just open up anywhere, because it is a business at the end of the day. It's like opening up, I don't know, the Gap anywhere. It may not work out, But by becoming a part of the community and hiring local people within your community is the way to go.
Okay, thank you. We're going to send this around our panel so they can all address it.
Sure. I think another thing that can be done as reporters to bridge that gap is that Tim and I, in our work, try to write about all types of restaurants, all types of food, all types of people. It's not just focusing on the kinds of restaurants that get Michelin stars, although they do tend to get a lot of attention. People love to read about that. But something that we really try to do, and Tim especially in his column, the $20 Diner, he writes a lot about immigrant cuisine, and it's something that we, as this new administration has come in, it's something that we have kind of focused our reporting on just in the last few weeks. We've done a number of different stories about the immigrants who are making food and the communities who are making food and where this food is coming from, and also giving credit to the people who originally invented these food. There's a lot of appropriation in food too. It's something that credit should always be given to. Some of the stories that we've done about that, I've written about chefs who are having conversations about gentrification. Oh, I think I lost my mic. Having conversations about race and gentrification over food and how food can bring people together to have those kinds of difficult conversations. It's the kind of story that we as reporters are always looking to do.
Okay, our next panelist.
Yes, I would echo what Kwame and Maura have said. Food for sure brings people together. I mean, it is a unifier that is so powerful, and that happens at any dining table or makeshift dining table. I think that happens. I think today more than ever, with everything people are talking about, food is a great healer and it brings people together. So will it help rectify some of the gentrification? I don't know, but I know that it will at least offer the proper dialogue in a very pleasant way because you're eating and talking. I will also say that in terms of what Kwame said, we are an industry that hires people, and we're always, these restaurant operators, owners, chefs, they are always looking for people who are interested in really learning the trade of a position in a restaurant, whatever that may be. So I just say that in terms, if there's interest, then there should be reach out for sure to my association to talk about various workforce programs, our Educated Eats Foundation, where we offer some scholarships. There are jobs to be had if the interest is there, because the training and the commitment on the part of the owner or the chef is there because they need good people who are committed, loyal, and want to grow in this industry.
So.
So I think the gentrification question is very important. And I mean, the fact is when this kind of development happens, it often moves people out and it brings in the type of restaurant or whatever the business is that many people can't afford. And this is a big issue. And, I was on this stage over at the Busboys and Poets a couple months ago with Marcus Samuelsson. I'm sure many of you know who Marcus is. Great chef from Ethiopia originally, grew up in Sweden. He opened a restaurant in Harlem. And we started talking about gentrification, and we were also here with the founder of Busboys and Poets, and the conversation came up, and I asked them, how do you deal with the accusations that you've gone into a neighborhood that was historically black, and now you've changed it. You fundamentally have changed it. And some people who used to live there cannot afford it. And like you were saying, it was an uncomfortable conversation, because it is an uncomfortable conversation. And their response was that they become part of the neighborhood, that they hire people in the neighborhood, that they be part of it. They're not separate from it. And, as I look around, it's like Busboys and Poets, it is part of the neighborhood, right? It is named after someone who grew up in U Street. It's named after Langston Hughes. And so when it was opened, it tried to embrace, it was creating something new, but it was affordable. It was trying to create something that respected the history, and also invited everybody in. And to me, that seems like a pretty good model of trying to move a neighborhood forward, but embracing its past.
I'd just like to add, let's give kudos to Busboys and Poets. Because if you look around this room tonight, we have a representative from everybody in all quadrants of the city. So Busboys and Poets is certainly doing its job and helping to bridge the gap with the gentrification that you mentioned. We have another question. Please stand up. Thank you.
With the guide only being released once a year, I heard you say October, would you all be willing to go back and report to Michelin that it needs to be released over the internet and it has to have more resources? Or based on the reaction and the responses and the concerns that you received today from the audience, what are you interested in taking back to them so they can improve your business?
We have no affiliation with the Michelin Guide. I cook for a living. That's it. They write. So we can't even go back to them and tell them anything. We have no affiliation. We're just...
But maybe they read our story.
Yeah.
Go ahead, say that.
But maybe they've read some of our coverage. We've expressed some of the same frustrations that people in the audience have been talking about too. Their classification of DC neighborhoods, or kind of like stereotyping certain parts of DC. And I like to think that maybe they've read our article and that it's something they'll take into consideration. But we are not employed by Michelin.
Are there any Michelin inspectors in the room?
We'll never know.
Yeah, and you might want to check out Maura's and Tim's article, 10 Things in the DC Michelin Guide That Don't Make Sense. I'd like to say that Tim and Maura cover a variety of areas in terms of what they felt. You ever heard that saying, things that make you scratch your head and go, They actually have a section on that in their article, things that made them scratch their head. Let's have another question, please. Stand up, please state your name.
Hello, my name is Timothy.
Please speak up, we can't hear you.
My name is Timothy. My question was, how do you think the Michelin Guide is going to impact tourism in the city, with it being so new?
We'll have all of our panelists address that. Let's start with Tim and go around.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of it. It was how to affect...
How will it affect tourism in the district?
That's a good question. And I think DC gets a lot of tourism already. It's a big tourism town. People come here because we have a lot of history, we have monuments, and now we have a real restaurant scene. My sense, this is just my sense, this doesn't mean it's the truth or it's even accurate. But my sense is that this is not going to drive a lot of tourism here. I think once tourists are here, they might look at it and use it as one more guide. There are so many ways that people judge on how they're going to go to a restaurant, and this would just be one more.
Kathy.
I think what we've seen in terms of trending, I mean, there are more people coming to Washington to do more than just see the national monuments, and they want to explore the neighborhoods, and they want to explore Washington from a different perspective, and food is one big thing that they do want to explore. I think the Michelin Guide helps in any city. And I think we'll see. You know, the reality is that it's here now. The guide is here now. And we are all hoping that it will grow and be more comprehensive and be much thicker as time progresses, but it's a start. And I think in terms of additional audiences it may attract to Washington, D.C., I think that it will attract an additional audience.
Hold the mic up.
Sorry. I think one thing to remember about the Michelin Guide, too, is that it is for a specific audience. I mean, Michelin buyers and readers, you know, it's very popular in Europe. It's very popular in Japan. It's not so popular here. I mean, I'm guessing a lot of people in this room probably aren't going to go out and buy a Michelin Guide right after this. Am I right? So, I mean, there are a number of different ways that people here, you know, decide what they want to do on trips. And I think people who aren't from the European tradition of Michelin are more likely to maybe check TripAdvisor or to read local critics like Tim or myself, or you know, if they're going somewhere else, they might check local media. They might not really be as interested in what the Michelin Guide has to say. So I think maybe it could drive a certain type of tourist, that type of tourist who maybe is European, or there's actually a number of people who have a hobby in this country of going to every single starred restaurant, people in the world. So they have a lot of disposable income. They travel all around the world and they go to very expensive restaurants. So certainly we will get some of those types of tourists. But I'm not sure that the guide has a big enough audience, at least in the US, to really make a huge difference compared to the number of tourists that we already get, which is a lot.
Kwame?
Just from what I've seen working in 3 Michelin star restaurants, that a lot of the customers are international clientele. So from my end, I do see a boost in tourism. Maybe not something that's like a grand scale, but it is prevalent, because a lot of people would come to my restaurant. They travel just to come there, and then they also would go to the other restaurants. Or the restaurants that were actually on the list, and they would come to my restaurant. So,
Okay, thank you. We have another question here.
Do I have to stand up?
Yes, please, and state your name.
Oh, God. Good evening. My name is Arnold Butler. And my take on this whole thing is they're talking about 2 publications here. 2 publications, you know, and opinions from other countries. But DC is it's a large, you know, they got a large complexities, I would say, of people and personalities here that can get on the board and open up your own publication, especially with the communications group over here. You know, sure, they got good restaurants in the inner cities and stuff like that, and these people aren't going to cover that. But they're waiting for you to bring it on out there. You cover it and get your stuff on the stuff, so everybody here would know what's going on in the inner city, other than crime and what have you. That's my take on that.
Okay, thank you for your comments, sir. Yes, give him a round of applause. We've had a lot of questions, not a lot of comments. We're going to go to this question here. Please stand up. It's kind of tight over there, huh? Okay, we'll just speak directly into the mic loudly and state your name. Thank you.
All right, my name is Rita. I have a couple questions.
Let's try one, please.
Yes, ma'am. My first question to you guys, my number one question is, with you guys saying who y'all are, being Michelin and everything, have you ever thought when y'all doing these panels to actually have a list or give something or be able to hand something out to the people about the places that you experience or the places y'all have gone to? You know what I'm saying? Have y'all ever thought about that? And then with y'all not being all Washingtonians, have you really experienced everything that Washington has to give? Because you have a lot of people in this room speaking to y'all like y'all don't even know the half of what we have. Or a lot of them are saying we have other places that you haven't even experienced yet. So my thing is, even still, have you ever thought about having a list, even your top 5, that you can hand out to people the day of and say, hey, we've been there, we tried this, go try this.
I'm gonna direct this to you. Okay, again, let me just restate. Nobody up here is from the Michelin Guide, and they don't take part in what the Michigan Guide publishes. However, we do have 2 food reporters who write about restaurants all the time. So let's start with you, Maura, and then Tim, I'd like you to address that.
I'm not sure.
Well, she thought you were from the Michelin Guide, so she just wanted to know, do you put out lists?
Yes.
So I just said that because you are a food reporter,
Right.
you talk about that all the time.
I got it. So yes, Michelin Guide, they have their list. We, as the Washington Post, have our own lists. We have a different perspective, obviously, than Michelin. And the difference is, and that's part of the reason Tim and I wrote this story about things that were confusing to us, because we live here. I'm not a native Washingtonian, but I've been here for 13 years. I'm originally from Pittsburgh. And we spend more time in this community than people from Michelin do. Again, not as much as someone who grew up here, but it's something that, it's our job to learn about this community and to report about this community. So the Washington Post, it's mostly our other critic, Tom Sietsema, but he puts out a list of what he thinks are the best restaurants in the city too. He does a list every fall, and then he also does another restaurant edition in our magazine in the spring where he goes back to older restaurants and sees if they're still up to par. And so, again, Michelin is just one opinion. And it's one of a number of opinions. And so, it might be totally irrelevant to a lot of people here. And they might find something that the Washington Post writes or something on Yelp even more relevant to them than what the Michelin Guide is.
Tim?
I'll just echo what Maura just said. We do put out a lot of lists, and lists are important. People need like a very compact way to see what we think are the best restaurants, and they're just our opinions. But like Maura said, Tom Sietsema, the lead critic, he's put out many lists. I've put out lists, like I do the bargain restaurants, and every year, at the end of the year, I do my a top 10 favorites, and you can find that online for the past 3 years. And they're always new places every year. I've done a list of my 10 favorite Ethiopian restaurants, which I spent months looking around and eating at many Ethiopian restaurants. I published that. I published my favorite Mexican restaurants. I'm working on my favorite Chinese restaurants right now, from all the different provinces of China. I've done, what else? I can't even think of all the lists, but we have lots of lists. And they're all available online. They're still available online. It is the quickest and easiest way to find those lists. So, if you have questions, just let me know.
Okay, we're going to take one more question in the back.
Good evening. My name is Ms. Collins, and I just wanted to thank you guys, the panel, because you have been very informative. When I got here, I knew nothing about the Michelin Guide, but I do have a question for Kwame. My question is, what was your specialty dish, and where was your restaurant?
Restaurant was called the Shaw Bijou. Specialty dish. It's hard to say. It's usually the guests that will say what your specialty dish is. If anything, it may have been an Alaskan king crab dish with roasted garlic bermonte and uni batarga.
Well, that sounds great. That sounds fantastic.
Before Dr. Ward closes this out, I just wanted to make my own personal comment. You guys have had some excellent questions, and I just wanted to draw a line from the beginning of this event to the end. At the very beginning, Tim Carman described his experience going, I can't say it correctly, Szechuan? Szechuan. He explored the neighborhoods and found a Szechuan restaurant in a hole in the wall. Someplace he'd never heard of before, someplace he cold called to find. So I just wanted to draw a direct line from his experience doing that to the young lady in the back who described her restaurant on Benning Road. And I would like to encourage her to approach Tim after this and invite him to her restaurant.
Okay, thank you. To our audience, give yourselves a round of applause. Let's give it up for our panelists, Mr. Tim Carman, Miss Kathy Hollinger, Miss Maura Judkis, and Mr. Kwame Onwuachi. For those of you who have never seen me moderate, my take on this, I'm a poet, in addition to being a professor and other things. So I'm going to close this food discussion out with the Michelin Guide in DC culture, food for the soul. When it comes to what tastes good, everybody doesn't have good taste. But when individuals get paid for their opinion, sometimes what they reference is known what's called talking out of the side of their face. It doesn't take a genius to know that when a meal is good, what eats it and cleans the plate, and sometimes down to the bottom of the bowl. Did this discussion on the Michelin Guide in DC culture give you food for your soul? And will it make you think about what, where, who, what the crime rate is, what it looks like, or will it still be what it tastes like and your interpretation? Or will you not try something new because of an article's trepidation? It's food for the thought, excuse the pun. But this ends tonight's Humanitini on the Michelin Guide and DC culture. Stick a fork in us. We're done. Thank you and good night.